Alright folks, how you doing? So in the last video I covered how King Edward I Plantagenet treated his Jewish subjects. How did he treat the church? Well, once again we're going back to the book William Wallace, Robin Hood Revealed, and this is a passage called Harassment, Theft and Bribery on page 272. Quote, "The Bury Chronicles shed some light upon Edward's political ambitions and greed, and how they in turn affected the church and unsettled Europe. It describes Edward's Grand Alliance and how it was put together by his council led by Bishop Beck. It involved bringing together, quote, by bribes and treaties and promises of mutual friendship, among others the kings of the German states and Aragon, and a list of others in the Low Countries. The cost has been estimated at £250,000 between the years 1294 and 97. In Gascony, he was to spend as much as £360,000 between the years 1294 to 1300. In the summer of 1294, he seized all wool and hides belonging to the merchants of England and forced them to pay an increased duty. Quote, the Maltote, or Maltote, I don't know how you pronounce it, Maltote, if they wish to retrieve their goods. On the 16th of June that same year, he ordered the examination of all church monies, claiming it was to ensure that all money was sound and of the proper weight." Man, this guy sounds hella paranoid. On the 18th of June, he seized all church monies that had been collected for funding a crusade, money that was to be retained by the church until a crusade was prepared. The scrutiny of the money was resented as it ignored the immunity of the church and was seen as an invasion of sanctuary. The money was counted and the majority was sealed up in bags and stolen to be used, quote, ad opus regis, for the king's use. By September, the clergy was ordered to pay a tax of half their income, however derived. Half their income! Honest to God. By September, the clergy was ordered to pay a tax of half their income. Oh yeah, I already said that, sorry. The English historian Edmund King, who wrote the preceding passage, seems to reason that Edward's behaviour was somehow laudable. Quote, he was successful in changing his subjects' presuppositions about tax, and this was his great achievement. Yeah, it's a great achievement for an asshole, that's for sure. Pope Boniface VIII felt it necessary to censure Edward with a papal bull, Clericis Laicos, in 1296. This banned all taxation of the church without first seeking a papal license. See what I mean? Christianity back in those days, it was taken seriously and it was powerful. Edward pressured the church for more money. In November 1296, he summoned a parliament at Bury St Edmunds. The clergy, having read the papal bull, asked Edward for more time to consider his demands. He allowed him 40 days, after which time the clergy would be declared outlaws. Oh my God. Man, he's really pushing it, isn't he? He's going to outlaw the clergy. Honest to God. By the time the clergy next met in January 1297, Edward had begun another war with France. They saw this as another burden. The clergy refused to pay and were outlawed. Jeez. He soon wore down their opposition. Although Archbishop Welchesey showed a clear lead to oppose him, others crumbled. The northern bishops chose to pay, as did several southern bishops. Edward went to war with France in August 1297. On September the 11th, the Scots defeated his army at Stirling. This forced him into making a truce with King Philip of France by October. It also reduced pressure on the church as Edward curbed his demands. Wallace's victory at Stirling greatly benefited France. This is a primary reason for the French king's high regard for Wallace. The English clergy agreed to pay Edward a tenth of church income, as opposed to half. Some were surprised that they voluntarily chose to pay him, but we find their reason for this in the exhortation of the Bury Chronicler. Quote, the war is lawful because it is fought for the safety of the kingdom and the commonweal. The property of everyone is obviously involved. Edmund King comments, quote, "When this became obvious to the Bury chronicler, Edward had won his greatest battle. Every one of his visits to Bury, and there were 15 in all, may be accounted skirmishes in a long campaign. It was a fight, in the last analysis, for his reputation. The excellent feasts he offered the monks on his visits were aimed to impress one monk above all, the one who continued in his day the historical work that the king so valued. No modern politician ever cared more about his press notices than did Edward I. Edward's first queen, Eleanor, was as grasping as her husband. She had her staff keep a close watch over the properties of deceased tenants of the crown. One of her letters from the 1260s lists several properties and instructs her agents to procure the best one he can, quote, although in such a manner that no one will think our behaviour as covetous. No, I don't think anyone thinks that at all. Jeez. Many did find her behaviour covetous. You don't fucking say. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Rothesay, wrote to the Queen's Treasurer in 1286. She had her own account at the Exchequer, requesting him, quote, when you see an opportunity, to remonstrate with the Queen for dealing with estates that were in debt to the Jews. Quote, she acquired many manors, and those the best, said one chronicler. Henry III, Edward's father, had long held ambitions to subjugate Scotland, which at that time was one of the richest countries in all of Europe. Well, you wouldn't think so watching Braveheart. His covetous nature was evident in his son. The sudden death of Alexander III and the termination of his line by the death of the Maid of Norway created a situation ripe for exploitation by Edward. Given his later actions, he must come under suspicion of involvement in their demise. Various histories claim that there were no witnesses in Alexander's death. The relating of his supposed impetuosity and hurrying to be at the side of his new wife is questionable. It is not characteristic of that wise king. Even as a child, he rebuked the wily Henry III's attempt to extort recognition of his supposed overlordship of Scotland. So yeah, this is looking pretty shady. And besides, if Alexander III didn't have a mistress, he's the first king in history who never had a mistress. There existed in Scotland a pro-Norman party. It was of no concern to them if Scotland's sovereignty was to be lost. These men had vast tracts of land in both England and Scotland, and if compliant with the English crown's ambitions, stood to gain much more. Therefore Edward had many potential accomplices willing to assist him in his schemes. Quote, at that time 2 parties were striving for supremacy in Scotland. That headed by Walter Comyn, Earl of Menteith, was the more national, and proved the stronger at first. Alan Durward, Justiciar of Scotland, was the leader of the opposition, and was suspecting of having sinister designs on the succession. The ship that was sent to bring the young Maid of Norway to Scotland was fitted and supplied at the port of Great Yarmouth in England. Edward had not only a motive, but also an opportunity to poison the child. It is curious that this seemingly healthy child sickened and died during this short journey. So lots to go through there, isn't there, when you think about it? And like I said, what really made John the Graham, I talked about him in past videos, what made him so laudable is that John the Graham was Norman. Yeah, he fought on Wallace's side. But you see this in Outlaw King and in Braveheart, basically. You see that, the nobles have lands in Scotland and in England. What's kind of left out is that they're Normans. See, they come from the Davidian Revolution, which I'll unpack in future episodes on Unslaved, and probably on this channel as well. But I'd love to do a whole episode with David and Michael about the whole Norman sort of background to the First Scottish War of Independence. I mean, it's pretty interesting. There's a lot to unpack there. Obviously, it would take multiple videos to go through all that. But yeah, I mean, Edward, would he be capable of poisoning a child? Absolutely, in my opinion. I mean, this guy is not a nice guy. I mean, he sounds basically like, he sounds highly narcissistic. The way it's described here, what is it? The quote, "No modern politician ever cared more about his press notices than Edward I." That was a quote from Edmund King on page 273 here. You know, he wants to look good while thieving and robbing at the same time and strong-arming the church into giving up half their income. I mean, that's what's written here. What is it on page 272? The money was counted and the majority was sealed up in bags and stolen to be used ad opus regis for the king's use. By September, the clergy were ordered to pay a tax of half their income. Yeah, honestly. And then Pope Boniface VIII has to come in with a papal bull and hit the brakes on Edward here, saying, no, what the fuck are you doing? This banned all taxation of the church without first seeking a papal license. So basically, the Battle of Stirling Bridge was a lot more instrumental than it might seem at first. In fact, the Battle of Stirling Bridge, if I'm reading into this correctly, forced Edward to lower his demand from the church that they give half their income to a tenth of their income. So yeah, I mean, it's cause and effect. You know, it says it right here. The English clergy agreed to pay Edward a tenth of the church income rather than 50%. Some were surprised that they voluntarily chose to pay him. Well, you need to give him something. It's like dealing with the mob, you know. You're not going to get away with sticking the finger up at them and saying, fuck off, not giving you anything. They'll just come back and smash your windows in the next day and burn your house down. They had to give him something. That was obvious, you know. But they weren't going to give him half. So it's kind of like any negotiation. And it's saying here, Eleanor of Castile, Edward's first queen. Very narcissistic as well. Remember the quotes? Quote, though in such a manner that no one will think that our behaviour as covetous. Covetous means greedy. Covetous means you want something. You know? So, pretty interesting stuff. We'll unpack some elements of this in future videos. Also, the whole thing about Henry III, you know, wanting Scotland as well. That's interesting because it's not mentioned here, but the matriarch of the Scottish monarchy was Queen Margaret, and she was the elder sister of the last Saxon king of England, Edgar Atheling, that was his name. He was the last Saxon king before the Normans took over England, and Queen Margaret, she was a Saxon princess, so the mother of King David I of Scotland was Anglo-Saxon. So the English claim to the Scottish throne and the nation of Scotland, the Kingdom of Scotland, comes from Queen Margaret, the wife of Malcolm III Canmore. Anyway, hope you found this informative, and thank you for listening.